Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It is Tuesday. It is November. Again, it was November last Tuesday also, wasn't it? Wow. Second Tuesday of November. Yeah, I know what day it is, really. Hope you're having a good week so far. Hope you had a good weekend. What did we do over the weekend? We actually had a busy weekend. Not like some weekends where we go further away. We stayed closer around where we live. But Friday night we had dinner with friends and explored an area that we hadn't seen much of. And then Saturday morning we went to a farmer's market nearby. They don't call them farmer's markets here, but that's what I think of it as. And we got some great produce that we used to make guacamole and salsa for a lunch that we went to on Sunday with friends. So we went to 3 different little towns near us on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and had spent some time with friends, different friends, each of those times. And yeah, dinner, then in the morning, and then lunch. So 3 different times of the day. We're just, covering all our bases. Not really, but it was good. And then Thursday my husband had doctor's appointments in 2 different towns. So we traveled on Thursday. We were driving around Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Monday we had a follow-up doctor's appointment, about a half an hour from where we live. So yeah, it was a lot of going, and my husband was very nice yesterday, and before the doctor's appointment gave me some good quality introvert time because I needed it. It was a lot of driving and going and, passengering, because he drove. He's very sweet. So he drove a lot, but it was a lot of going and visiting and hanging out with friends, and it was a very good weekend. But I was also very grateful for the introvert time, and it was a nice refresher. So I hope you had a good weekend, and we are, of course, here to talk about a book. It is the first book in a series, the Circle of the Red Lily series, to be exact. The book is called Exposed, and the author is Anna J. Stewart. As I said, this is the first in a series. It is crime mystery series. It is also romance. Let me go ahead and give you the description of the book. Working as a Hollywood photographer means Riley Temple has seen it all. But then she finds herself staring at the chilling image of a dead woman. When her questions about the film lead to violence, she reluctantly turns to the only person who can help, Detective Quinn Burton, the police commissioner's son. Her history with the LAPD is complicated, her trust in authority tenuous. But to find those responsible and protect those closest to her, she's willing to do anything, even trust a cop. After more than a decade on the job, Quinn knows a dangerous situation when he sees it, and Riley Temple is up to her ears in trouble. But not for the reason she thinks. The pictures she stumbled on call into question a notorious murder conviction, one that powerful people have a vested interest in keeping in place. Seeing this case through means betraying someone, his job, his family, or the woman he's falling in love with. As old secrets are revealed, Quinn and Riley find themselves targeted by members of a secret society that has long maintained violent control over Hollywood's powerful elite. A society that, until now, has remained hidden in the shadows. A society that will stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. So that is the description of Exposed. Again, it is the first in the book, in the series, Circle of the Red Lily. This is available in November 15th. So a week from today, you can get this book and read it if you are a fan of mysteries, of crime, of not only a series, but a series that's going to focus on a different friend in Riley's circle in each book. So that's always fun to get to know different characters. The people who are secondary characters in this book will have more prominent roles in future books. So I always appreciate that. I like to get to know secondary characters in that way, but also have the characters that I've come to know still be there. Obviously, it's a tight-knit circle of friends, so the characters who are in this book, Riley and Quinn, are going to for sure make appearances throughout the series because they will all be working together to solve this mystery, this conspiracy that's been going on for decades. And this first book gives you just a really good taste of what's coming for the whole series, and I definitely want to know what is going to happen. But I am jumping the gun here, so let's go ahead and turn to the interview. Again, it's the Circle of the Red Lily series. This book is called Exposed, and the author is Anna J. Stewart. Hi, Anna. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I am happy to have you. We are going to talk about your book, Exposed, which is the first in a series. But before we do that, if you could share a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you.
Sure. My name is Anna J. Stewart. That is the name I write under. I write all across the romance genre, and most of my books have a little bit of adrenaline rush. I love romantic suspense, but I also write sweet, small-town contemporary romance for Harlequin. So, if you love just fun romance novels with a focus on family and some really super hot heroes, my books are probably for you.
And this is slightly off topic, but when I was looking at your website and your books before before this interview, first I think you mentioned briefly Montana in Exposed, and I can't remember how. Just like a really, really fleeting reference, and then you have at least one book set in Montana, right?
I do, yes.
Yeah, I just say this because I'm from Montana, so whenever that word pops up, I'm like, oh. So have you ever been?
I'm trying to think. Yes, I think I've been. I hate to say it. I'm born and bred California, and I have traveled very little within the United States. I've traveled much more overseas than I have the United States. So I believe so. A friend of mine had moved there briefly, and she had a whole bunch of her friends come up for a visit. So we were able to explore a lot of what Montana had to offer. And yes, it was Montana. I just remembered because I always have to remind myself it's Whitefish that she was living in or near.
Whitefish is beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was absolutely, absolutely gorgeous. I had no idea, and I'm over 50. I had no idea there was such beautiful land within this country. And if anybody if anybody has not been there yet, get up there because it's just absolutely stunning. And the Big Sky moniker completely fits.
And you should see it in the eastern side of the state. It's even the sky is somehow even bigger.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So, yeah. That was just a side note. That was like, we're not being paid by tourism for Montana. It catches my attention whenever I see that word. So
of course.
We'll talk about the actual book now. It's called Exposed. Can you give an overview of the story?
Sure. It's a romantic thriller suspense. It's about a Hollywood photographer named Riley Temple who makes a horrifying discovery in some photographs she comes across and takes her straight into the middle of a murder mystery and a previously notorious murder conviction that is now called into question, and right into the arms of a super seriously hot cop who she probably shouldn't trust for a couple of different reasons.
And her friends nickname him Detective Sexy Pants, which is just hilarious and wrong on so many levels.
Well, yeah, true. Very politically incorrect, I'm sure. But it's actually her great aunt Moxie, who was at one time, she worked as an actress, like in the 40s and the 50s. And she's now in her 80s, and she still dreams of a comeback in Hollywood. And she's the one who gives him that nickname. And it's mostly kind of just to irritate her niece, just to kind of, twist the knife a little and to make sure that she is aware of what is right in front of her.
Yes, it made me laugh. What was your initial inspiration for the story and the series?
There were a couple of things. It was first, I think, the opportunity to write my publisher pretty much asked me, what do you want to write? And that's not an opportunity that most authors get. So I had this glimmer of an idea that kind of encompassed a lot of my different interests, which are, I love the idea of photography just because there's something appealing about being able to capture an absolute moment of time, and it tells the truth about that moment. So I've always had an affinity for photography in that way. And also I've been obsessed with old Hollywood and the whole studio system and everything since I was a little kid. I share the same birthday as Marilyn Monroe. So I have read like every biography possibly written on her over the years. So the idea of being able to write a story that took place in Hollywood, that I could bring in a bunch of my own interests, it was really appealing, and it made the writing process almost a lot easier because I was writing about stuff I was really interested in. So that was the original idea. And then when I got down to the plot of it, it was actually because of an episode of White Collar, which was a show that was on a few years ago starring Matt Bomer and Willie Garson. And Willie Garson played a character named Mozzie who bought an old storage unit, not really knowing what was inside of it. And it was filled with photography equipment and pictures and all kinds of stuff. And I thought, well, what would happen if there was like unexposed film in there? What would be on the film? And that was kind of the question that really opened the door to where the plot to Exposed came from.
All right. Now that you know a little bit more about the series and the inspiration for Exposed, we're going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, more with Anna. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking with author Anna J. Stewart about the first book in her new series, The Circle of the Red Lily. This book is called Exposed. Let's go ahead and return to the interview.
Did you set out to write it as a series, or did it start out as a standalone?
I don't think I'm capable of writing a standalone. All of my books always have secondary characters that tend to take over at some point. So I always just line them up ahead of time now. So this was always intended to be a series. In fact, my publisher wanted a series. So I said, sure, I can do 3 books in the series. I can do 5 books. What do you want? And they said, give us 5. And I said, okay. So it's a 5-book series. And the mystery that begins in Exposed, while the romance will resolve itself and we'll move on to a different couple in each book, the mystery will continue to unfold until all of the answers are tied up and revealed in book 5.
Yeah, and you if you didn't know it was a series when you started reading it, you're getting close to the end and you're like, wow, this is not wrapping up. I mean, some parts of it are wrapping up, but you know it's going to be a series because it's not exactly a cliffhanger, but there's not a lot of resolution.
For one particular character, no, there's not.
Yeah. So.
And that was my intention. I really wanted to close the door on one couple and open the door on the next heroine. That's how each of the books is gonna progress. And I really like the idea of doing that, mainly because those are the kind of stories I like to read.
Yes, well, and the group of the 5 friends, actually, I really liked them and was excited when I realized that the next book would be about a different character. So we're going to get to know each of those characters in their own story. So I actually like how when series work like that.
Okay.
So But in this book, the main characters are Riley and Quinn. What about them do you think will resonate with readers?
Well, for Riley, I think the fact that she's a very strong, forceful woman who knows who she is something that can be really appealing to readers. She's not a woman who is bogged down in self-doubt. She knows who she is. She knows pretty much what she wants. She's not particularly happy with her job, but her job pays the bills and she has responsibilities that she has to, fulfill. So, nothing's going to stand in the way of the truth that she needs to uncover, which is there's an attack on two of her friends, and she's convinced that the police aren't really going to do anything about it. So as far as she's concerned, she's the one who's going to find out the truth. Nothing's going to stand in her way from doing that, much to her own detriment, I think. She's not flawless. That character quirk of hers, if anything, makes her a little bit dangerous just because she doesn't always think things through. But the fact that she knows who she is and she's very confident in who she is, I think is something that's really appealing to readers. As far as Quinn goes, he's like most of my heroes are in that he's just a really good guy. You don't have to worry about him being a jerk or, going off the rails, or he's certainly not one for misogynistic behavior or anything like that. He's probably an idealized type of hero because that's what I tend to write. He's not perfect. He's also not tortured or traumatized. He doesn't have a whole lot of shadows following behind him, which is nice to write because it gives a little bit of levity to the story, I think. He honestly just wants to be the best detective and cop that he can be. He's also not going to let anybody he cares about risk themselves without him going along for the ride. And that's really where a lot of the clash between him and Riley come from, because she's perfectly capable of taking care of herself. He's not convinced that she understands exactly what it is that she's gotten involved in. So he's going to be right there beside her the whole step of the way, whether or not she wants him there or not. And from there, the sparks just fly. So the two of them together are really, really fun.
And you mentioned your interest in old Hollywood and the studio system, and Riley and her aunt Moxie own Temple House, which is a place where some of the actresses within that studio system lived in like the 40s and 50s. Is that based on a real building, or did you kind of do some research and create it on your own?
It's a little bit of both. I did do some research. They used to have hotels around the studio that would house like the Hollywood extras and the chorus girls and such that they used in the movies of the 40s and the 50s. But so that's kind of where the idea came from. I put this one a little bit outside of where the actual studios existed, just because I wanted a bigger area landscape wise to work with within Los Angeles. But I kind of took elements of different things that I had read about on books during the studio systems and different biographies that I've read over the years, and kind of created this idea of what I imagine something might have existed back in that time. And now the building that was originally used as a housing unit for actresses specifically now is an apartment building. I think it has 22 apartments in it. I had it all mapped out and diagrammed on my on my worksheet for a while. But it also retains that feel of the old Hollywood. The architecture is still very much the combination of Art Deco and, the glitz and the glamour. And I wanted the Temple House itself to become its own character, mainly because it's kind of the central hub of everything that's going to happen within all of the stories, not just in this first one. So it's a community and its own little small town within a building.
Thank you. So, photography and old Hollywood and architecture, it sounds like there was probably a lot of research that went into not only this book, but this series. What kinds of research did you do for this book specifically?
Well, I absolutely did the architecture research, which I find I've never really delved too deeply into that before. So it was a bit of a rabbit hole that I had to pull myself out of. And fortunately, I have my brain retains completely useless information, especially stuff about Hollywood and pop culture and all that kind of stuff. So all of that was kind of already implanted, although most of what I was reading is actually going to make more of an appearance in future books, especially one that deals more specifically with a particular Hollywood studio that I establish in this first book. But I also did quite a bit of research into how the LAPD works. It's a very unique kind of law enforcement system. So I wanted to make sure that I got, the department names and the locations and how the hierarchy works within law enforcement down there. And then I also did probably the most research on photography, knowing that Riley at the beginning of the story is actually developing 35 millimeter film. Yes, she works professionally with digital photography, but her love is really developing old film, lost film that's never been developed by anybody, because she loves the idea of revealing something unexpected. And boy, does she get that in this book. But I needed to actually watch videos on how 35 millimeter film is developed in 2022. So the chemicals that are used and the equipment that's used and all of that kind of stuff. I saved so many YouTube videos of people who are developing film and setting up dark rooms and all that kind of stuff. I really wanted to establish that as her world inside her apartment. So that was probably where the most research took place.
I would imagine that writing a series, I know that authors tend to do a lot more research, of course, than ends up in a book, because you can't put in everything. But does it help when you write a series and then some of that research comes into play later on, or do you just have to pile on the research for every book?
I end up doing research. Well, I don't plot. So pretty much whenever I come across a bit of knowledge that I think is going to tie itself into, it goes into a document in OneNote, and I save it in the notebook that's dedicated to that series. So anything that I might not use in one book, I go through all of my notes and I type in anything I haven't used yet, and I make sure that that's there for me to find if the plot takes me in a place where I'm going to need something like that. So I'm kind of always researching as I'm going along. It's just a matter of finding the right places to pop that information into the story.
Mm-hmm. So you're a pantser rather than a plotter. I
am. And there are parts of it that I know are going to happen, and I always have those written down. But for the most part, no. I have learned, after writing however many books I've written, that if I stick to an outline, the words don't come as easily. I feel like I'm tied down to what I've already put down. So I try to keep, synopses and all that kind of stuff as general as possible, just because otherwise it interferes with the creative process that apparently my brain has to go through to get the story on the page.
Time for the second break of the podcast. But when we come back, Anna will be talking a little bit more about the writing process and how that works best for her. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking with Anna J. Stewart. Before the break, Anna was talking about the way she writes, the way she puts together her storylines. She tends to be a pantser more than a plotter. So this next question is a follow-up to that conversation. Let's go ahead and return to the interview.
And then how do you ever write yourself into a corner, or do you have like a team of beta readers or editors that kind of help you in case things don't always gel?
Well, I'm traditionally published, so I'm tied to deadlines. And more often than not, I am writing right up to deadline. So I don't have time to send it to beta readers. Hopefully, maybe that'll get better in the future. I'm not sure. My editors have just been absolutely phenomenal as far as, helping me make the book the absolute best book it can be. There have been times when as soon as I send it to my editor, I also send it to somebody else to read, just so that I know I'm on the right track, or if it can help me anticipate whether or not something's going to be a problem. I did do that with Exposed, and I did send it to a friend of mine who lives here in the same town as me, and we had lunch, and she pretty much fortunately confirmed that, no, the book held together really well, and she didn't see any issues with it as far as whether or not like the plot didn't make sense or whatever. If I can fit it into my time frame, I would love to have more people read it before I send it to an editor. But for the most part, it's just me and my editor working on them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then how about characters? Do you tend to let them evolve as you write, or do you have a pretty good character sketch on each person, or maybe even just the main characters before you start writing?
I tend to know a little bit about them there again, because I don't plot. I don't want to know. I like the discovery process of finding out who these people are as we go along. I have a little bit, I didn't do that quite so much with Riley, especially since she was going to be the first book in the series. I knew more about her than I've known about a lot of my characters for the last few books I've written, only because I knew she was going to be the anchor of the series, and everything that she discovered and dealt with was going to be carrying through another 4 books. So I knew that I needed to cement her in the world of both Hollywood and Los Angeles, and in the world that she's created for herself within the apartment building of Temple House. And I also needed to ground her with her friends. So Riley took a lot of fleshing out to make sure I surrounded her with the right kind of people and the right atmosphere. Quinn, he was more of I'm getting to know him as I'm writing him. And his issues with how his career is going is something that kind of came to me almost halfway through the book, and I had to go back and tweak it a little bit. Simply because he's a legacy cop. He's a multi-generational cop. His father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather have all been police officers. So how do you deal with a cop like that in today's world when he's not really sure how to tell his father he doesn't want to take the same path his father did? So that was a really fun process of discovery, and I think really helped me also flesh out the conflict between him and Riley and how to make it more realistic.
Mm-hmm. Do you tend to include autobiographical elements in your writing, or steer clear of that?
There's probably a little bit of myself in all of my characters. If there's a particularly sarcastic or snarky character, you can pretty much guarantee that that's me coming through the page. Other than that, I don't think so. Unless if a character is dealing with a lot of trust issues, if that seems to be their big thing, that's also a big part of me. I'm not particularly trusting. So as far as whether or not that becomes part of the character, yeah, that part's me. But most of the time, no, I try to live outside of myself, mainly because that's the whole fun part about writing, right? You get to be all of these different characters who inhabit your books for at least as long as you're writing them.
Yeah, you kind of get to not exactly cosplay, but well, I don't know. Is that the literary version of cosplay?
Yeah, it's mental cosplay, sure.
Yeah, exactly. What you write romance, and this has romance in it, but it's also, mystery and a crime novel. So what draws you to the crime side of writing?
I think it's I've just always been a crime TV movie junkie. Those were kind of the shows I grew up with, the adventure shows. I grew up with the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. I watched the TV series. I was not a reader of either of those series, strangely enough. But adventure shows like Wonder Woman and Bionic Woman and all those kind of otherworldly type shows that I had growing up in the 70s. It just developed an affinity for me to really love the crime and the thriller aspects. And also I started reading, at that time they didn't have young adult books like they do now. So I was reading adult fiction by the time I was 8 or 9. Stephen King was one of the first books I remember reading. I read Carrie when I was 8, I think. So reading books that had that adventure and just otherworldly feel about them, I think is a natural gravitation toward the thriller and the suspense angle as far as writing for me.
Actually, that reminded me that you mentioned some of that in the About Me page on your website. And
yeah.
you talk about all those things, and then underneath that there's the official author bio, and I was like, oh no, I like the unofficial one.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you can't use that for everything, so
I let people take their pick as far as what they want to use for promoting me.
Sure. So there's 5 books in this series. Where are you in the process? When does the next one come out?
The next one is scheduled to come out July 11th. Yay. Yes. I start writing it next week or week after next. I'm going to take a little bit of a break once I get the book I'm writing right now finished. And then I'll take a little bit of a break and then start book 2. Hopefully, actually, I'll probably be starting it just around the time that Exposed comes out on the 15th. And this will be Mabel's story, which will pick up pretty close to right when Exposed leaves off.
Okay, thank you. And are there other of your writings that you would like to highlight?
Sure. We have, like I said, I also write small town sweet romance. We have a great collection called Christmas Town that's available in KU right now. It's a group of Harlequin heartwarming authors who have banded together. We have more than 80 stories, novellas right now, that take place in this small town we created. Melinda Curtis, Anna Adams, and I created back in 2014. So it just keeps going. And the latest one is Christmas Town Bake Off, which takes place over 7 days. And you get to experience the entire week of baking frivolity in a small, snowy Maine town for Christmas. And then in February, I'll have my next Harlequin romantic suspense, which is called the P.I.'s Deadly Charade, I think is what it's called. I'm starting to forget my titles. But this will be the latest in my Honor Bound series for romantic suspense with Harlequin. And it was a super fun one to write. The hero is actually an ex-con who is working to earn his PI license and falls for an up-and-coming lawyer, and it takes place in my town of Sacramento. So that'll be out in February, I think. So lots of books coming.
All right, wonderful. In terms of writing, is it something that you've always wanted to do? Did you come to that decision later in life? How did that path work for you?
It kind of happened by accident. Like I said, I was always a voracious reader as a kid. That was one thing my mom never said no to. She never said no to a book. Whatever I wanted to read, it was always in my hand. So, but when I was in high school, a group of friends and I started writing what today would be known as fan fiction, featuring some of our favorite rock stars, and everybody else outgrew it. And I did not. And right on the heels of that, somebody gave me my first romance novel. And I read it and I went, I have to know how to do this. And that's kind of where I got bit by the bug. It took me a really long time to buckle down and get serious and actually focus on getting published. And I knew self-publishing just was not the road for me. I'm far too lazy to be a self-published author. those authors work their butts off. I just want to write the book, pass it on, and move on to the next project. Yeah, once I finally got serious with it, it was about 2011. And then in 2012, I finished an urban fantasy romance that had me finaling in a pretty prestigious contest at the time. Got my first agent, and then 2 years later sold to both Harlequin and Berkeley. Ironically enough, not in urban fantasy, which is what that particular book was, but I had to make a shift in direction in order to pursue that dream of publication. So ended up with contemporary romance and eventually made my way into suspense and now thrillers.
Time for our final break of the podcast. When we come back, Anna's advice for aspiring authors. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Anna J. Stewart.
From that experience, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
I do. I have a couple of pieces. One is to read everything you can get your hands on. Newspapers, magazines, fiction, nonfiction. Read everything. Get your brain filled with as much information as you can. And secondly, write. The only thing you need to write is your brain. You can write on a keyboard. You can write on a notepad. There is no wrong way to write. And the only way you do learn how to write is by writing. No other author's procedure and how they write a book is going to work for you. Know that going into it. You're going to need to figure out what your own process is. You can experiment with other authors' processes that they've shared, but don't expect them to be the answer to easy words on the page. I've written more than 50 books now. There is no easy way to get words on a page except to put your butt in the chair and write. So, and lastly, whatever you're choosing to write, embrace it with your full heart. Defend it with your whole heart. We need stories now, probably more than we ever have. We need that escape. Your stories are vital. Don't let anybody ever tell you that whatever you're writing is less than simply because it doesn't fit their definition of acceptable fiction. All fiction is acceptable. All writing is acceptable. All stories are acceptable. Don't ever let anybody tell you otherwise. That's it.
Well, I agree on yes, all stories. There's somebody out there that wants to hear that story.
Yes.
In terms of your writing schedule, do you have set hours during the day that you write, or how does that work for you?
Well, it depends on how far I am away from deadline. Typically I write anywhere from 8 until noon. And then hopefully I've hit my word. I like to get anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 words a day if I can. So if I've hit that target, then I'm done by noon. If not, I'll write again from about 3 until about 5. I try to do that at least 4 or 5 days a week. Closer I get to deadline, like I told you before we started this podcast, I was up at 3 this morning because I have a book due on Monday and I still have quite a few words to write. So the closer to deadline, the longer the hours get. But typically I write 4 to 5 days a week, anywhere from 4 to 6 hours a day.
Okay. And you mentioned read everything. So when you have the time and take the time to read for yourself, what are your go-to genres and authors?
I'm a romance junkie, still am, always will be. Everything I write will always have a romance element in it. if it's not even a straight romance. I also love thrillers and suspense. I tend to read what I write, which is funny because a lot of authors say they can't read what they write because it tends to either stifle them or discourage them. But if it's written by Nora Roberts or her alter ego JD Robb, I will buy it the day it comes out. She's the first romance novelist I ever read. I have read every single book she's ever written. Well, up until recently, I have about 5 I have to catch up on. But she is my absolute go-to author, as is Dean Koontz, Michael Connelly, Jane Ann Krentz. And I've just started gravitating back into horror, mainly because I'm playing around with a story idea that might take me in another direction. So I'm usually open to just about anything. The one thing I have trouble reading is first person. But I'm trying to break through that mental block and read a little bit more first person, just because there are some great stories out there that I would love to read, like the Jack Reacher books, but they're first person. So I'm going to have to get over that because I really want to read that series of books.
Maybe that will be the one thing that helps you get over that hurdle,
That might be.
You never know. I know you have a website, so if you can share that as well as any social media presence where people can find you.
Sure. Actually, you can find all the social media links to me on my website, which is www.authorannastewart.com. I'm on, what am I on? I'm on Facebook. I'm on Goodreads, BookBub, Amazon. I'm on Twitter, but we'll see how long that lasts. And pretty much Facebook is the best place to find out about me. Best way to keep up with me is to subscribe to my newsletter, which I only send out when I have actual news. And I always have giveaways in my newsletters too, which you have to subscribe to in order to be entered. So newsletter, website, Facebook, those are the top 3.
All right, perfect. Thank you. We have talked about a few different things today, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to mention or highlight at this time?
I think pretty much if you like a trope, where the common trope among all of my books, doesn't matter what genre I'm writing, all of my books always revolve around the same thing, which is family, whether it's the family the characters are born to or the family that they create on their way through life. That's really what's at the heart of my books. So it's romance, it's family, it's action adventure, it's wonderful small towns, and that's pretty much what you'll get when you open one of my books.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time. I know you're on deadline, so thank you for taking the time to talk to me about Exposed and the series. It's the Red Lily series. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you once again to Anna for joining me to talk about the first book in the Circle of the Red Lily series. Something that she said, I think, during her advice for aspiring authors answer was something that I'm sure you've heard before and that people have said before, but for some reason it just struck me this time. She said, there's no wrong way to write, which is absolutely accurate. You write in the way that works best for you. Somebody else's method is not necessarily going to work for you, but for some reason the play on words struck me this time. There's no wrong way to write. Of course, W-R-I-T-E instead of R-I-G-H-T, but write and write spelled differently sounds the same. There's no wrong way to write. Just struck me this time. I'm rambling a little bit, but I liked the way it sounded. It just sounds like something that you would, I don't know, I'd do something silly and cross-stitch it on a pillow or something, or a sampler and put it in my office if I were writing, just because I like the play on words. I love the way words sound. I love vocabulary, and my husband says I'm a giant nerd because not only do I love vocabulary, but I just love how certain words sound, and he thinks I'm weird. But that is beside the point. I was saying thank you to Anna for joining me for this interview to talk about Exposed. I really appreciate her. Of course, I always appreciate all of the authors that join me. on this podcast. If you are interested in this book, it is out in a week. It is out on November 15th, so you can pre-order it or order it when it comes out. Maybe you're starting your Christmas shopping and you know someone who would be interested in this book and you want to get them, do that. It's so mean to your friends who love to read. Get them started on a series that only the first book is out. That's so delightfully, deliciously mean in a great way, in that like mean to your reader friends kind of way, but in a not mean way. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, it's out on November 15th, so check it out if you are so inclined, if you are a fan of romances and books that center on family, because the series definitely does, not only biological family, but chosen family. Riley and Quinn both have family that is very important to them. Riley has biological family in her aunt Moxie, but she also has this very close chosen family in the friends that are now going to make appearances throughout the series. So if that's important to you, that's definitely present in this series, but also you've got the darker elements of crime and mystery and this conspiracy to solve. So check out this series if you are so inclined. Thank you, as always, to you, my listeners, for joining me, for listening to me ramble about vocabulary and get lost in whatever I was trying to say that then does not come out of my brain properly. I so very much appreciate you and am grateful that you've been on this journey with me and have met so many wonderful authors that maybe we wouldn't know about if it wasn't for this podcast. So thank you for joining me. If you haven't done so already, and you are so inclined, it would be great if you could do a couple of things for me. Like, subscribe, follow on whatever podcast platform you listen to this podcast on. That way you will always get new episodes when they come out. There's no guessing as to when they come out. You'll get a notification or however that works on your platform. Also, if you could leave a review, that is amazing. Helps us out so much. Starred, written, etc. Whatever is best for you or easiest for you, most comfortable for you. And then follow on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Love hearing from you. Hit me up with questions. Let me know what you're reading. Let me know if you read any of the authors that I've spoken with on this on the podcast and what you thought. Like I said, I love hearing from listeners. So come hang out with me on social media in the meantime. Hope your November is going well. It is snowing where my family lives in Montana. It is it was very cold today. It only got up to 69 here. So you can throw a shoe at me or something if you want. It is raining and it's damp, but it is not winter, like a snowy winter. But I hope that if it is snowing at your house, first of all, you're safe. First of all, you're warm, but that you can take advantage. Hopefully you can take advantage of those snowy days and find extra time to get yourself lost in lots of good books, because that's always the best, especially with a nice hot beverage of some sort. So make use of those snowy days if you can, and join me next time when I will be talking to author Annette Liebeskind Berkowitz. I'll make sure that I get the pronunciation of that better next time. We're talking about her historical fiction novel based partially on some of the events that happened to her in her own mother's life. That book is called The Corset Maker. So join me for that conversation. In the meantime, have a wonderful week and hope everything is going well for you, and enjoy whatever weather you're having. But enjoy it with a good book. Talk to you later. Bye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.